From the outside, Jacob's family seemed perfectly ordinary, maybe even charming. His mom, Nancy, was a retired public school teacher with a passion for potluck dinners and judgmental stares. His sister, Sarah, was a single mom with too many opinions and not enough boundaries. And Jacob? He was the golden boy, polite, responsible, the son who could do no wrong. I met Jacob when we were both 25, fresh out of college and ready to start our lives. He had just moved back home to save money, and I was working full-time and juggling graduate school. When we started dating, things felt perfect. Jacob was respectful, thoughtful, and emotionally available in a way that made me think I had finally met someone who understood me. But then I met his family. The first time I visited their home, I could feel something was off. Jacob had his own space, a finished basement that was practically a small apartment. His parents had gifted it to him as a way to maintain privacy, and he invited me to stay over sometimes. At first, I thought it was sweet, supportive even. But that illusion shattered quickly. One morning, while we were still half asleep under the covers, Sarah barged in, no knock, no warning, just full-blown entry like she owned the place. I scrambled to cover myself while she plopped down on the edge of the bed and started chatting with Jacob as if I wasn't even there. She talked about a new recipe she'd tried, a TV show she liked, and the whole time I sat frozen in disbelief. This wasn't a one-time thing. It happened again and again, always the same. Sarah storming in like privacy was optional, like boundaries didn't apply to her when it came to Jacob. The last straw came one morning when she tried the door and found it locked. She freaked out, banging on it like we had committed a crime. Jacob got up to open it, and before he could say anything, Sarah shouted, "Did you lock the door because of this skank?" Pointing at me like I was some dirty secret. I didn't even say a word. I walked straight to the bathroom and locked the door behind me. I remember staring at myself in the mirror, wondering what I had gotten myself into. Jacob apologized. He always did. He said Sarah was just attached and a little overprotective. But that wasn't protection, that was possession. She wasn't his girlfriend, she was his sister. But the way she acted? It felt like she thought she had some special claim to him. Even worse, Jacob's mom acted like I didn't exist. At family dinners, she'd pass me the salt without looking at me. She never used my name. When I tried to make conversation, she'd steer it back to Jacob, as if I was just a prop in his story, not a person in my own right. Still, I told myself to be patient. I was marrying Jacob, not his family, but I should have listened to my gut. That twisted dynamic, the one I noticed on day one, wasn't just awkward, it was dangerous. Because when a mother believes no one is good enough for her son, and a sister treats him like her emotional support animal, anyone who steps between them becomes the enemy. And I was that enemy. I just didn't know how far they'd go to get me out of the picture. After that morning with Sarah barging in and calling me a skank, I should have known things wouldn't get better. But love does a funny thing to your judgment. Jacob was remorseful, genuinely embarrassed, and promised he would set firm boundaries with his sister. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that once he saw how toxic their behavior was, he'd choose our relationship over the dysfunction he'd grown up with. For a short while, it seemed like maybe he did. Sarah apologized, barely. She mumbled something about just being protective and offered a thin excuse that she had urgent things to tell her brother. I wasn't convinced, but I nodded and let it go. What else could I do? Over the next year, Jacob and I got engaged. He proposed on a quiet beach with a simple ring and shaky hands, and I said yes through tears. It was supposed to be the beginning of something beautiful. A new chapter. Our chapter, but from the moment we announced the engagement, everything spiraled. Nancy, my mother-in-law, didn't even pretend to be happy. Her face barely moved when Jacob told her. No smile, no congratulations. Just a cold, blank stare. "You're making a mistake," she told him behind my back. "You could do so much better." When Jacob confronted her, she doubled down, saying I was too entitled, too spoiled, too not one of us. Apparently, being raised by two loving parents and going to private school made me unrelatable. My existence was a personal offense. Sarah wasn't any better. She accused me of being a gold digger, even though Jacob and I had split every bill since the day we started dating. She claimed I was trying to isolate him, steal him away. She even threatened to reveal some non-existent secret to make Jacob call off the wedding. But Jacob didn't waver. He reassured me that he loved me, that he saw through their bitterness, that no one, not even his family, could change his mind. Still, we decided to fund the entire wedding ourselves. We wanted to avoid giving Nancy any leverage. She offered to pay for half, but Jacob declined, explaining how hard we had worked and saved. She pouted and said, "So now you don't need me anymore." Her words cut deeper than she realized. Eventually, we compromised, letting her organize the rehearsal dinner. It felt like a peace offering, but even that turned into a mess. The night of the rehearsal, I walked into the venue and felt my stomach drop. Plastic tablecloths, mismatched chairs, and trays of soggy fast food-style Mexican dishes greeted us. Nancy was already tipsy, loudly complaining about how exhausting it was to plan a dinner when no one appreciates anything anymore. She slurred about how she hoped the wedding would be over soon so she could have her son back. I saw Jacob's jaw clench. He tried to calm her, but she waved him off like a child. Sarah defended her, saying she was just stressed and that I needed to be more understanding. Understanding? After everything. That night, back at home, I broke. I told Jacob the truth. If his mom and sister showed up to the wedding, I wouldn't walk down the aisle. He stared at me in disbelief, not anger, just heartbreak, but I didn't flinch. I was done playing nice. This wasn't just about seating charts or floral arrangements. This was about dignity, about peace, about starting our marriage on our terms, not theirs. And to my surprise, Jacob agreed. The next morning, he picked up the phone and told his mother and sister they were no longer welcome at the wedding. The fallout was immediate and brutal. When Jacob told his mother and sister they were no longer invited, he expected backlash, but nothing could have prepared us for what followed. Within hours, his phone was flooded with calls and texts. First, from his mom, crying, begging, saying I had poisoned him. Then from Sarah, furious, calling me controlling, manipulative, and a disgrace to their family. Jacob held firm. For once, he didn't waver. "If you can't treat my wife with respect," he told them, "you don't deserve to be at the wedding." It should have ended there, but it didn't. 2 days before the wedding, one of Jacob's cousins, Laura, called to give us a heads up. She had screenshots from the family's WhatsApp group. My hands trembled as I scrolled through them. Sarah had posted a message encouraging every female family member to wear white. "Why should only the bride get to stand out?" she wrote. "Let's make a statement." It was sabotage, plain and simple. She hadn't just accepted our decision not to include her. She was actively planning to crash the wedding and embarrass me. Nancy was in the group too, chiming in with heart emojis and laughing reactions. I couldn't breathe. For a moment, I felt like I was drowning in betrayal. My stomach twisted, my chest ached, and I couldn't stop shaking. Jacob saw the messages and went completely silent. I could tell something inside him had snapped. These weren't just overbearing women anymore. This was intentional cruelty, malicious, calculated. He didn't say much, just, "We're going to have a beautiful wedding, no matter what." The day arrived. The sun came out, my dress fit perfectly. The venue smelled like fresh-cut flowers. My parents beamed with pride. Friends traveled from out of state. The atmosphere buzzed with joy and love. And Nancy and Sarah, they never showed. Phil, Jacob's father, came alone. He wore a navy suit, brought a modest bouquet of flowers, and quietly told me, "I'm proud of you for standing your ground." During the ceremony, I glanced at Jacob. His hands were trembling, but his eyes were steady. We exchanged vows we'd written ourselves, raw, honest, full of promises forged not just in love, but in resilience. We danced, we laughed, we toasted with champagne and ate too much cake. For one day, it was like the rest of the world didn't exist. No drama, no judgment, just us and the people who truly loved us. Later that night, Jacob and I sat in the backyard of our Airbnb, barefoot under string lights. He held my hand and said softly, "I think I knew all along they'd never accept you." Not really, but today made me realize that's their loss, not ours. I rested my head on his shoulder and let the silence fill the air. It wasn't bitter, it was peaceful, For once, we weren't bracing for another outburst, another insult, another guilt trip. We were finally free. But freedom, we'd soon learn, comes with a price. Because some people don't take rejection lightly. And Nancy and Sarah, they were just getting started. After the wedding, Jacob and I did what newlyweds dream of. We started building a life that was truly ours. We found a modest 3-bedroom house in a quiet neighborhood just outside Seattle. It wasn't flashy. The walls needed repainting, the kitchen tiles were cracked, and the backyard was overgrown. But it was ours. We spent weekends sanding cabinets, repainting the living room, and hanging photos of our wedding day. The house became a symbol of everything we had earned without help, without shortcuts, and, most importantly, without the toxic influence of his mother or sister. For a while, things were quiet. Nancy and Sarah went radio silent. No texts, no calls, no surprise visits. Jacob would occasionally get invited to dinner by Phil, and even then, he went alone. I didn't mind. Phil had always been kind to me. He didn't meddle, didn't guilt Jacob, didn't take sides. He was just present, calm, a rare grace in that family. I started to believe maybe, just maybe, we'd been granted peace. Then one afternoon, everything changed. I was folding laundry in the living room when my phone buzzed. It was Nancy. We hadn't spoken since the wedding. "Hello," I answered cautiously. Her voice was sweet, too sweet. "Hi, sweetheart. I was just checking in. How's the house? I hear it's huge for just 2 people. I froze. That was how she started? No apology? No acknowledgement of everything she'd done? I took a breath. "We're doing well, thank you." Then came the real reason for her call. "Well," she said, her tone suddenly more serious, "Sarah is pregnant again. Can you believe it? Baby number 6, and well, she's struggling. You know her situation. No income, her boyfriend's still between jobs." Between jobs, right. I'd heard Jacob describe the man as someone who spent more time gaming than working. Nancy continued, "I was thinking since you and Jacob don't have kids, and since your house is so big, it might be time for you to consider helping out." There it was. I didn't answer right away. I felt my stomach twist. She added, "Sarah and the kids could move in for a while. Maybe use one of the guest rooms. It's family after all." I laughed, not out of amusement, but disbelief. "You're asking us to give up our home for Sarah and her family?" She sounded offended. "I'm just saying, it makes sense. You two don't need all that space. And Sarah, well, she's got real needs. Pregnant, jobless, and trying her best. And you think we should move out? Or what, give up our privacy? Pay the bills while she and her boyfriend contribute nothing?" She hesitated. "Well, I figured Jacob would understand." My heart stopped. "What do you mean?" She replied casually, "I already spoke to him. He said he'd consider it." My blood ran cold. I hung up without another word. That night, when Jacob got home from work, I confronted him. He looked genuinely confused. "What are you talking about?" "Mom said what?" "She said you agreed to let Sarah and her circus move in." Jacob looked stunned. "I said no such thing. She mentioned Sarah's pregnancy and how they were struggling, but I told her we couldn't do anything." My eyes welled up with tears, not from sadness but from anger. They were trying to manipulate us. Again, twist the truth, pit us against each other, and guilt us into surrendering what we'd fought so hard to build. And worst of all, they thought I'd fold. They still didn't understand. I wasn't the same woman who stayed silent during dinner table insults. I had a spine now, and Jacob? He was learning to stand with me. But this wasn't over. Nancy and Sarah had already crossed a line, and soon they would go even further. After Jacob reassured me he had never agreed to let Sarah and her family move in, I felt a brief wave of relief, but the damage had already been done. Nancy, my mother-in-law, had lied to my face. And not just a small white lie, she deliberately tried to manipulate me by twisting Jacob's words. Worse, she felt entitled to our home, as if the sacrifices we made didn't matter, as if our privacy, peace, and marriage were all secondary to Sarah's ever-growing needs. For the next few days, I tried to shake it off. I kept busy, working late, reorganizing the garage, even baking just to distract myself. but that uneasy feeling lingered in the back of my mind, like a storm cloud waiting to burst. Then it did. That Saturday, Jacob left early to run errands. I stayed behind, enjoying a rare, quiet morning. I had just sat down with a cup of coffee when the doorbell rang. When I checked the Ring camera, my heart stopped. It was them. Nancy and Sarah, they weren't alone. Sarah had brought along 3 of her kids. One sat on the front steps eating a snack, while the others played in the yard, like they already lived there. I didn't open the door. Instead, I activated the microphone. "Nancy, Sarah, why are you here?" Nancy looked up at the camera like she hadn't expected me to see them. "Sweetheart," she said with a forced smile, "we just stopped by to talk, in person." I stared in disbelief. "Uninvited? With children? You could have called." Sarah cut in, her voice loud. "It's not a big deal. We're family. We just wanted to check out the house. Jacob said he might be open to it." "No," I interrupted. "He didn't, and you know that." Sarah scoffed. "You're just being possessive. You're childless in a 3-bedroom home while I'm pregnant and crammed in a tiny apartment with 6 people. What kind of woman hoards space like this?" The audacity of her words punched me in the chest. I replied calmly, though my voice was shaking, "You are not moving in here. And you should leave, right now." That's when Nancy lost it. She marched up to the door, banging her fist against it. "You've poisoned my son. Ever since he married you, he's changed. You've made him cold, selfish." "No," I said through gritted teeth. "You just don't get to control him anymore." The kids had stopped playing. Even Sarah looked stunned. I added, "If you don't leave in the next 5 minutes, I'll call the police and file for a restraining order. This is harassment, and I've got everything on camera." Nancy stared at the lens, her mouth hanging open. "You wouldn't dare." "I already have the footage. One more step and you'll see how serious I am." They hesitated. Then Sarah pulled her kids together and stormed off toward the car, muttering under her breath. Nancy followed, but not before yelling, "You'll regret this. When Jacob realizes who you really are, he'll come back to his real family." The car screeched down the street. My knees gave out as soon as the door was locked. I collapsed on the floor, shaking. Not from fear, but from fury, from exhaustion, from having to constantly defend my home, my marriage, and my worth as a person. When Jacob came home and I told him everything, he didn't hesitate. He grabbed his phone and called Nancy. I could only hear one side of the conversation, but his voice was calm and clear. "You are no longer welcome at our house. You crossed every line." He hung up. Then he turned to me and said, "You're my home. This is our home, and no one, not even my family, is going to take that away." For the first time in weeks, I felt something deeper than anger or fear. I felt safe, but we both knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of a deeper fallout. The weekend after the confrontation felt surreal. I kept replaying the scene in my head. Sarah dragging her kids across our lawn like it was her new front yard. Nancy banging on the door like she owned the deed to our home. It wasn't just about space. It was about boundaries, about control, about years of entitlement finally meeting a firm wall. And for once, that wall wasn't Jacob. It was me. But as peaceful as our house felt in the aftermath, the outside world didn't stay quiet for long. It started with whispers, calls from distant relatives Jacob hadn't spoken to in months. An aunt he hadn't seen since college left a voicemail saying she was disappointed in how he was treating the women who raised him. A cousin DM'd him on Instagram with a passive-aggressive message, "Family always helps family," and just saying. Jacob didn't respond to any of them. He simply turned to me and said, "They've only heard one side." I knew what that meant. Nancy had already begun her campaign. Sure enough, the next morning, Jacob's cousin Michelle texted me screenshots from their extended family group chat. Nancy had sent a long, tear-filled message about how she and Sarah had been cruelly cast out by us. She wrote about how Sarah was pregnant, living in inhumane conditions, and how we were hoarding a house while refusing to do the right thing. She even had the audacity to say, "Some women can't understand the importance of motherhood because they'll never experience it." It felt like being slapped in the face. Jacob sat beside me, reading the message in silence. Then he whispered, "She weaponized our infertility." That broke me. For years, Jacob and I had tried. Doctor visits, blood tests, hormone injections. We rode the roller coaster of hope and disappointment until it wore us out completely. And when we finally decided that love, just us two, was enough, we thought we had found peace. But Nancy wasn't just toxic. She was cruel. I wanted to respond, I wanted to scream, but Jacob stopped me. "We don't fight lies with more noise," he said. "We stand tall in truth." The next day, Jacob called his father, Phil. Phil answered on the first ring. Jacob didn't mince words. "Dad, I'm done pretending everything's fine. Mom and Sarah crossed the line. They tried to force their way into our lives and lied to everyone when we didn't bend." Phil was quiet for a while before saying, "I know. I've been hearing their version of the story and it didn't add up. I'm sorry, son. I should have said something sooner." Jacob exhaled, a breath I didn't know he'd been holding. "Dad, I love you, but I need you to understand. If you want to be part of our lives, you can't stay silent when they hurt us." Phil responded, "I hear you, and I'll make things right." Later that night, Jacob posted a short, calm message to the family group chat. He didn't name names. He didn't vent. He simply wrote, "We are not abandoning family. We are protecting our home and peace after repeated violations. If you want the truth, ask us directly. But if you choose to believe lies, please don't contact us again." Some left the group chat. A few messaged him privately to apologize. But most stayed silent because for the first time, Jacob wasn't their golden boy anymore. He had chosen me. That night, as we sat on the porch under the soft glow of our patio lights, Jacob took my hand and said, "I'm sorry it took me this long to stand up, but I promise you this house, our life, is sacred now. No one gets to break it again." I nodded, trying not to cry, because in that moment, I didn't feel like the woman they called a gold digger, or the one they labeled childless and unworthy. I felt like a woman whose husband finally saw her, and that changed everything. A week after Jacob's message to the family group chat, things were quiet, almost too quiet. No new texts, no angry voicemails, no unexpected visitors. For the first time in months, our home felt like a sanctuary again. I could finally sip my morning coffee without wondering who might try to hijack our peace. But silence from Nancy and Sarah was never a sign of surrender. It was a storm, holding its breath. It came on a Saturday morning. Jacob and I were getting ready to meet some old friends for brunch when the Ring camera pinged. He checked his phone and froze. "They're back," he muttered. I leaned over to see the screen. There they were, Nancy in a beige trench coat like she was stepping into a courtroom, and Sarah, noticeably pregnant, holding a toddler on her hip and dragging a suitcase behind her. I could feel my blood pressure rise. Jacob opened the app's intercom. "Why are you here?" Nancy looked directly into the doorbell camera and said, "Jacob, let us in. We have nowhere else to go. Your sister is about to give birth." He stared at the screen in disbelief. "We talked about this. You are not moving in." Sarah chimed in, voice trembling, but not with fear, with indignation. "I'm your sister, Jacob. How can you let me go homeless with my kids?" Homeless? That was a bold lie. She still had her apartment. This was a desperate play for sympathy. Jacob replied firmly, "You chose your life, Sarah. You chose to have 6 children with a man who won't even lift a finger, and now you're trying to crash into our lives again?" Number Nancy's voice turned icy. "You'll regret this. One day, you'll wish you had your family." That was it. Jacob opened the front door, not to let them in, but to speak face to face. He stood on the porch, calm but resolute. "Mom, Sarah, I've tried. God knows I've tried to keep a relationship with you both. But this is where it ends." Nancy tried to cut him off. "We're your family." "No, you use that word like a weapon," Jacob snapped. "Family isn't blackmail. It's not showing up with bags, expecting a free ride, then calling my wife names when she doesn't cave." Sarah, now in tears, shouted, "You're letting her poison you." I stepped out then, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to stand beside Jacob. He had defended me. Now I was going to stand with him. "She's not poisoning him. I said. He's just finally seeing the truth. And the truth is, this house is ours. You don't get to claim it because you made bad choices and expect us to clean them up. Nancy looked at me like I had slapped her. You have no children. What do you know about family? That line could have destroyed me once, but not now. I know enough to protect the one I have, I replied. Jacob turned and held my hand. Mom, Sarah, please leave. If you don't, we'll have to call the police. It was Sarah who cracked first. She yanked her suitcase, cursed under her breath, and waddled back down the driveway. Nancy stayed still for a beat longer, like she thought she could guilt him into backing down, but Jacob didn't flinch. Finally, she turned and followed Sarah to their car. They didn't slam the door. They didn't look back. And for the first time, it wasn't because they were being dramatic. It was because they knew they had lost control. Back inside, Jacob collapsed onto the couch, burying his face in his hands. I sat beside him. Are you okay? I asked. He nodded slowly. It hurts, but it also feels like the first honest breath I've taken in years. I understood, because sometimes peace doesn't come from making everyone happy. It comes from finally choosing yourself. The days following that confrontation were strangely quiet. No phone calls, no messages, no uninvited visits. For the first time in years, Jacob and I experienced what it truly meant to live without interference. The silence felt like a cool breeze after a thunderstorm. Refreshing, unfamiliar, a little eerie. Jacob was different, too. It was subtle at first. He slept a little better, his jaw less tense. He started laughing more, genuine belly laughs over dumb sitcoms and TikToks. For the first time, I saw him without the shadow of guilt that his mother and sister had cast over him since childhood. One evening, as we curled up on the couch, Jacob turned to me and said, You know, I always thought if I kept the peace, things would eventually get better. But that wasn't peace. That was surrender. His voice cracked slightly. They never loved me for me, just for what I could do for them. That hit me like a gut punch, because I'd felt that too, not just for him, but through him. They didn't care about the life we were building, the sacrifices we'd made. They only cared that he was accessible, moldable, useful. He reached for my hand and squeezed it. Thank you for making me see that, even when it hurt. I nodded, swallowing a lump in my throat. A few days later, Jacob got a message from Phil, his dad. It was simple. Just a photo of their backyard, freshly mowed, with a caption that said, Miss you, son. Just checking in. Jacob smiled. Phil had always been the quiet one in the family, but he had a steady kind of supportiveness. He didn't interfere, didn't yell, didn't manipulate. He just showed up when it counted. Jacob responded, Appreciate you, Dad. Let's grab lunch soon, just us. They ended up meeting at a small diner that weekend. Jacob told me later that Phil had apologized, not just for the recent events, but for the years of letting Nancy dominate every decision. He admitted that he had spent too long staying silent just to keep the house peaceful. But silence, he said, was its own form of damage. I should have protected you from that, Phil had told him. You were always the one holding everything together. You shouldn't have had to. Hearing that made Jacob emotional. His dad was far from perfect, but at least he could own his mistakes. That acknowledgement meant more than years of fake apologies from Nancy and Sarah combined. Back at home, we began reclaiming our space. We repainted the spare bedroom, the one Nancy had once claimed would be Sarah's temporary room. Now it was my art studio, full of color and light and peace. Jacob put up new shelves in the living room and hung a framed print that read, Your peace is not up for negotiation. The house started to feel more like ours, not just physically but emotionally. And then came the inevitable, a message from an unknown number. You'll regret cutting us off. We're family. We didn't even respond. Instead, we saved the message, forwarded it to our lawyer, and blocked the number. Because here's what we had finally learned. Family doesn't demand blind loyalty. It doesn't manipulate or shame or show up at your door screaming about betrayal. Family respects boundaries. Family chooses love over control. Family shows up with kindness, not entitlement. We had fought to protect our home, not just the four walls and a roof, but the emotional safety within it. And we weren't giving that up for anyone. Not anymore. It had been almost a month since the last dramatic visit from Nancy and Sarah. The silence wasn't just golden, it was sacred. Jacob and I had finally settled into a rhythm that felt like real life, not survival. The house was calm, laughter returned to our dinners, and we could finally breathe without bracing for impact. Then came the unexpected knock. It was a Sunday afternoon, warm and breezy. I was baking banana bread, and Jacob was assembling a new bookshelf in the living room. When the doorbell rang, I wiped my hands on a towel, peered through the peephole, and froze. It was Sarah, alone, no Nancy, no camera in sight. Just her standing awkwardly on the porch, clutching a reusable grocery bag like a lifeline. I opened the door just enough to speak, but didn't invite her in. "What do you want, Sarah?" She looked tired, not just physically, emotionally drained, like someone who had finally run out of performances. Her eyes were puffy, probably from crying. Her voice was hoarse when she said, I don't know where else to go." I didn't say anything. I wanted to close the door. I should have closed the door. But instead, I called for Jacob. He came quickly, wiping his hands, and when he saw her, his jaw tensed. "Why are you here?" Sarah hesitated before speaking. "He left, my boyfriend. Packed up last night and just left. No note, no money. I've got 5 kids at home and nothing." Jacob stepped forward. "What do you want from us?" "I'm not here to move in," she said quickly. "I know I messed up. I know what Mom did, what I did. I was awful to both of you. But I'm scared, Jake. I'm broke, the kids are hungry, and Mom said she can't help unless I do what she says, and I just can't anymore." She looked at me. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't even expect kindness. But if there's anything left in you that remembers we were once siblings, please, just help me figure out what to do." I studied her face. For the first time, there was no smugness, no superiority, just a woman at rock bottom, her pride shattered. Jacob turned to me, silently asking what I thought. "I'm not opening our home," I said firmly, "but I'll buy your kids some groceries tonight, and I'll help you find a shelter or assistance program. That's it." Sarah didn't argue, she just nodded, tears welling up. That's more than I deserve. And maybe it was, but we weren't doing it for her. We were doing it to break the cycle, to offer basic decency without letting toxic people back in. We gave her a bag of essentials: bread, pasta, diapers, canned goods, and a list of resources. Jacob drove her back to her apartment and said goodbye at the curb. No hugs, no promises, just closure. When he returned, he looked lighter. "I needed that," he admitted. "Not for her, but for me. To know I can care without being consumed." We sat on the couch that night in silence, the weight of years finally lifting off his shoulders. He wasn't the protector anymore. He wasn't the fixer. He was just Jacob, my husband, my partner, finally free. Sometimes the strongest boundary you can draw is the one lined with compassion, but not sacrifice. A week after Sarah came to our door, things started to shift in subtle, uncomfortable ways. At first, it was quiet. Sarah didn't reach out again, and Jacob and I slipped back into our peaceful routine. The banana bread sat on the counter untouched. Neither of us had the appetite to finish it. We were too emotionally drained, even if neither of us said it out loud. But then the rumors started. It began with a phone call from one of Jacob's cousins, Melissa. She was always sweet, the kind of person who stayed neutral in family conflicts. Her voice was tentative when she said, "Hey, I just wanted you to hear it from someone who doesn't want drama. But your mom is telling people you kicked Sarah out when she had nowhere to go, that you slammed the door in her face." My heart sank. Jacob closed his eyes and rubbed his forehead. "Of course she is." Nancy was at it again, rewriting the story, playing the victim, painting Jacob and me as selfish monsters, while conveniently leaving out Sarah's past stalking, the photos, the verbal abuse, the entitlement. We didn't respond publicly, not yet, but then Jacob got an email from his aunt, his mom's sister. It was short, cold, and cutting. "I never thought I'd see the day you'd turn your back on family. Your father would be ashamed." That one stung more than either of us expected, because Jacob's dad, Phil, was the only one who had ever treated us with decency. And now Nancy was using his memory like a weapon. "She's twisting everything." Jacob muttered. Again. I nodded. But we've been through this. We knew this would happen. They rewrite the story so they can be the heroes. Still, it hurt. It hurt when Jacob's niece unfriended us on social media. It hurt when old family friends stopped liking our posts or commenting. It hurt when one of Sarah's kids sent Jacob a text that read, "Why don't you love us anymore?" That one broke him. He sat on the back porch that evening just staring out at the sunset, shoulders slumped. I wrapped my arms around him from behind, and he finally whispered, "I didn't want it to come to this. I didn't want them to think I hated them. I just needed them to stop hurting you, hurting us." "I know," I said softly. "But people like that, they only understand love when it looks like sacrifice, when it looks like giving up your peace. That's not love, that's control." He nodded slowly. "I just wish someone would see the whole story." So that night we told it. Jacob sat down at his computer and wrote a letter. Not to Nancy, not to Sarah, but to the extended family. The aunts, the cousins, the people hearing only one side. He didn't rant, he didn't name call. He told the truth, calmly, directly, and with as much dignity as he could summon. He talked about the years of control, the favoritism, the cruelty toward me, the stalking, the fake cheating accusation, the demand to give up our home. He ended it with this: "This isn't about revenge. This is about finally protecting our peace. I love my family, but I love my wife and my sanity more. If that makes me the villain in someone else's story, I can live with that, because I'm finally living in truth." We hit send, and then we turned off our phones. We didn't need validation, we just needed closure. The morning after we sent that letter, Jacob and I woke up to something we hadn't felt in weeks. Quiet. Not the kind of silence that's heavy with anticipation, but the kind that wraps around you gently, like a blanket. For the first time in a long time, there were no missed calls, no hateful texts, no guilt-drenched emails. Just the soft hum of the fridge, the birds outside, and the sunlight slowly creeping across our kitchen floor. We sat there for a while, sipping coffee in our pajamas, not saying much, just being. Then, slowly the responses started to trickle in. The first was from Jacob's cousin, Matt. "Man, I had no idea it was this bad. I'm sorry for assuming. Proud of you for standing up for your wife." Then came Aunt Lisa. "I always wondered why you two were so distant during family gatherings. Now it all makes sense. I hope you know I'm still here for you." One by one, the messages rolled in. Not all of them were supportive. Some were neutral. A few still tried to play peacemaker. But the overwhelming tone was different this time. People saw us. They saw Jacob not as the golden boy gone astray, but as a man who had been trapped in a web of toxic expectations for too long. They saw me not as the outsider who tore the family apart, but as someone who had simply asked to be treated with basic respect. Even Phil, Jacob's father, called. "I read it," he said quietly. "Every word. And Jacob, you did the right thing." There was a pause, like he needed to gather himself. "I enabled a lot of that, son. I thought by staying out of it, I was staying neutral. But silence was just another way of letting it happen. I'm sorry." Jacob's hands trembled when he hung up. He didn't cry. He just exhaled, like someone had finally opened a window after years of suffocating air. But the peace didn't last long. That evening, a new post appeared on Facebook from Nancy. A photo of her and Sarah, arms wrapped around each other, smiling under a quote graphic that read, "Family isn't always blood. It's who shows up when you need them." The caption? "We rise above the lies. Love always wins. Family first. Trust truth will prevail." It was subtle, but it was unmistakably aimed at us. Jacob saw it first and simply rolled his eyes. Classic. But what surprised us more wasn't the post. It was the lack of engagement. No likes, no comments, no hearts or reactions. And then we started getting screenshots from others. Sarah's best friend had commented, "Maybe people would believe you if you hadn't lied so many times." Another reply from someone we didn't even know. "You tried to ruin your brother's marriage. Now you're shocked he doesn't want you in his life." By the next morning, the post had vanished, but the damage was done, not to us, but to them. The truth was finally out, and it echoed louder than any fake apology or forced smile. That weekend, Jacob and I took a walk through our neighborhood, hand in hand, talking about things that had nothing to do with family drama, future vacations, maybe fostering a dog, trying that new Italian place on 3rd Street. We were building a life, our life, one not built on guilt or obligation, but on mutual respect, healing, and love. For the first time, Jacob looked over and said, "I think we finally shut the door." And I smiled because I knew we hadn't just shut it. We'd locked it and thrown away the key. A week after Jacob and I took that quiet, soul-cleansing walk, the final domino fell. It was a Saturday morning. The sunlight was spilling across our porch, and I was baking muffins, something I hadn't had the peace to do in months. Jacob was fixing a loose hinge on the gate, humming to himself. It felt like life had finally stabilized. Until the doorbell rang. I opened it to find a manila envelope on our welcome mat. No note, no signature, just our names scrawled in sharp, angular handwriting that I recognized instantly, Nancy's. I called Jacob over before opening it. Inside was a handwritten letter, pages long, filled with bitter apologies disguised as accusations. Words like misunderstood, unfair, and betrayed by our own son were peppered between condescending phrases like, "You'll understand once you have children of your own." At the very end, she wrote, "If you don't want Sarah's family to move in, fine. But just know, this family won't be waiting around when you two finally realize you need us." Jacob didn't even finish reading it. He calmly folded the pages, walked into the kitchen, and slid them into the trash bin under the sink. "That's the last time she gets to invade our home," he said, not angrily, just with quiet certainty. It wasn't the kind of dramatic conclusion you see in movies. There was no shouting match, no final face-off, just a clean, decisive end. But it was what came next that moved me most. That night, Jacob logged into his social media accounts, not to post, not to defend himself, but to delete the old family group chats. He unfollowed Nancy, removed Sarah, blocked the aunts and cousins who had spent years fanning the flames of division with their whispers and backhanded comments. Then he turned to me and said, "Let's build something new." That was the moment I knew we were truly free. Over the following weeks, our lives blossomed in ways we hadn't anticipated. Jacob's father, Phil, started stopping by occasionally, not to rehash the past, but just to check in, bring over fresh fruit from the market, or help Jacob with home projects. Quiet support, no expectations, no drama. I reconnected with my sister, someone I'd grown distant from during the chaos. We began meeting for coffee every Thursday, trading stories, laughter, and reminders that not all family ties have to hurt. Jacob and I even decided to start exploring adoption, not because we felt pressure, not because we had anything to prove, but because we had love to give. And now, finally, we had the space to give it. One evening, we stood outside, watching the sun dip behind the rooftops. "You know," Jacob said, slipping his arm around my waist, "I used to think I had to earn love from my family, prove I deserved it. But you taught me something else." I looked up at him, heart full. "You taught me love isn't about guilt. It's not a debt to be repaid. It's something you protect, something you build." That night, as we turned off the lights and crawled into bed, there were no lingering fears about who might call or show up. No anxiety about what rumor was being spread behind our backs. There was only peace. It didn't come easily. It came after storms, ultimatums, shattered illusions, and years of wounds. But it came, and we earned it, because sometimes the greatest act of love isn't holding on. It's finally, firmly letting go.